I had earlier, before I came, prepared a written formal apology. But as yesterday, in the reserve, the eloquence of those who've spoken has overwhelmed any possible form of apology that I could have written beforehand. So I want to start by acknowledging with immense gratitude the opportunity to speak to you, particularly the presence of the Grand Chief and the chiefs, who spoke with passion and with great eloquence. But virtually everything that has been said today has been extraordinarily powerful. Overwhelmingly so in many cases. So I've more or less, metaphorically, because it's quite difficult to tear one of these up, I've more or less torn up what I was going to say. So please excuse me for not being quite as clear as I might have been if I'd not listened to you. I am here today with a heart filled with a sense of darkness, of shame and sadness, to acknowledge the hurt done to your people, to apologize for the damage caused to your communities, and to seek to look for ways to recognize the Church of England in its historic form, its grievous sins against the First Nations, the Inuit, and the Métis people of Canada. I've listened to the stories of grief and humiliation. They have been sacred stories. This has been a sacred room, a place of holiness in which sin committed has been brought to light. And structural sin, not just individual sin, that has been terrible enough, but in the words we just heard, and in Senator Sanderson's extraordinarily eloquent speech, structural sins in society and worse still in the church. Sins of racism, of discrimination, the greatest evils we can face. And in those stories, I have seen the scars you bear, caused by the deep wounds that we have inflicted upon you. And I have felt a touch of the shadow of the pain handed down to you by the church's actions and behaviors. I can't say that I felt the pain, that was in my notes, but how can one? Only those who were there, who lived through it, know the pain. Which is why I say I felt a touch of the shadow of that pain. And I am utterly consumed by admiration at the bravery and the strength it takes to work towards healing and restoration from a place of brokenness and betrayal, and to start that with such open and holy sharing of the past. During these last many hours, there have been moments where the speakers have fallen silent because they could not carry on. I felt that those silences were not moments of hesitation, but moments of the fullness of the presence of our Creator God. Moments of extraordinary power in which the silence of this room was complete. And so I wish again, and truly and deeply and with humiliation as well as humility, to apologize for the broken relationship between the Church of England and the First Nations, the Inuit, the Métis peoples of Canada. We did not fulfill our historic commitment, and it was a commitment and promise, to be an advocate, ally, and relative, member of the family for you. Instead of standing with you, we abandoned you. Instead of advocating for you, we became complicit in and often directly responsible for residential schools, uninspected, unsupervised, uncriticized, unchallenged in their cruelty and the horrors they handed out indiscriminately to the most innocent and the youngest. The isolation of people groups on the reserves, and in the midst of your great poverty, the church shrugged its shoulders and contributed to further hardship. We promised to walk with Indigenous peoples, Inuit and Métis people and First Nations, to advocate them as you would do for a family member. We do, after all, talk of being brothers and sisters in Christ, a family. And that is what God calls us. But we shrugged off that call. The chasm between the lived reality of experience of the First Nations, the Métis, and the Inuit now, and what could have been legally, culturally, intellectually, structurally, in infrastructure, in every area of life, in the experience of generations, in the amount of suicide, in mental illness, in politics, in respect. The difference between what could have been and what is comes down to many things, no doubt, but here and now, a major contributor has been the church failing to keep its promises. And that chasm between what could have been and what is shaming and devastating. It has led to the attempted liquidation of intergenerational links, of culture, spirituality, and much more. We've heard that today. I won't go through all the names, but we've heard that today so eloquently and so powerfully from so many. Never have I sat and listened to so many stories in which suicide is normative. Never, and I come from a family where both my parents are alcoholics. One died, one has not drunk since 54 years. My mother. My father died. I know alcoholism, but I have never, ever, apart from at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, heard so many people talk of their own addictions. And it was acknowledged openly, admitted powerfully, and talked of clearly as the attempt to escape from the horrors of memory and of lived experience. I understand that from my own experience. And I want to echo and repeat the words of those who have apologized previously while lamenting that those apologies have been so necessary and so overdue. In 1993, Archbishop Michael Piers presented an apology for the Church of Canada's role in residential schools, repeated in 2010 by Archbishop Fred Hiltz, who spoke of the shame we still carry as a church and a people. And he, again, 3 years ago, apologized for the spiritual harm done as a result of the cultural and spiritual ignorance, arrogance, and cruelty that belittled and abused your people and did not recognize the presence of God in your traditions, the richness of your spirituality, and the strength and depth of your belief. If anyone wanted evidence of that, they would have had to sit only this afternoon or yesterday and heard time and time again the words of grace expressed towards the church, of an utterly undeserved acknowledgement towards this Archbishop for making an easy journey and sitting and listening. The presence of grace is always the greatest sign of the presence of God, the indisputable sign. The absence of grace, referred to by one of those who spoke towards the end, the absence of grace is a proof of people who knew nothing of God in what they did. History cannot truly be in the past until it's been fully healed. New atrocities continue to come to light. I know the past is deeply present in your lives, your memories, your expressions of life and culture. I know you carry the weight of generations of grief and trauma. I know that the residential schools and the church at times sought deliberately to do what in the Bible is condemned, which is to break down the memory of generations so you lose your identity. That was another word that came much today. I am so sorry that the church participated in the attempt, the failed attempt, because you rose above it and conquered it, to dehumanize and abuse those we should have embraced as brothers and sisters. I cannot begin to describe my near despair at hearing of the vestry of a church voting that it did not want quote-unquote Indian people in its presence. Dear God, the God who inspired the scriptures that say that in the church there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, Scythian nor barbarian, but all are one in Christ. Dear God, I am sorry that the church was not there for you when we should have been your greatest friends, and even if we were powerless, and I will come back to that, we should have been willing to suffer alongside you. That is better than nothing. I'm sorry that the church belittled your spirituality, denigrated and undermined your culture, tradition, above all your language, and abused your rights. And I am sorry that in an eagerness to share the good news of Jesus Christ, we committed the indefensible sin of an arrogant assumption that we brought God to you. I'm not sure who has the most right to be offended, the God who was already here, or you who knew that God, rather than understanding and seeking to listen. And Senator Saul, thank you. You spoke of the doctrine of discovery, of its deep, of the way that it set a pattern and culture for the history of Europe from the beginning of the 16th century, from 1493 till the middle of the 20th century. And still the after effects of that catastrophic nuclear explosion, the fallout continues in the systems of our economy and our structures, as you showed so clearly. Thank you. I had not seen that, and it spoke. I had seen it, but not understood it, and you spoke it so brilliantly. And I am very humbled. It's an inadequate word. I don't know what the right word is. I'm more than humbled. I find it unbelievable that you are even willing to attempt to listen to this apology and to let us walk with you on the long journey of renewal and reconciliation. It will not be an easy journey. It will not be a quick one. But I do commit to walking with you for as long as the Lord gives me strength so to do. If only this were only in Canada. But as you know as well as I, it's the doctrine of discovery spread its pernicious darkness and evil across the whole world. Pastor Ray Minnican, an Aboriginal pastor based in Australia, said recently in a conversation in which I was involved, apologies are cheap, if not offensive, unless they are accompanied by action. There is no hierarchy in suffering. There is no one whose suffering makes them more important or less important than others. There is simply the impact of injustice and the need for healing and the need to learn. And so I will make some hesitant commitments. I understand we need to match action with words. I commit, for my part, as much as I am able, that I will do that in partnership, not as some distant smart aleck who works out what you need and then does it to you, so that I can learn more from you what you would like that shared future to look like. I cannot speak, Senator, entirely to the challenges you gave, because they are not within my gift to control. Canada and its relations with the First Nations, the Métis and the Inuit, is not within the jurisdiction of anyone except those people. I will not insult you by consciously promising what I cannot deliver. One of the big differences between the Anglican Communion, of which the Church of England is a small part, and the Roman Catholic Church is I'm defined as a first among equals. And among equals usually has more impact than first when we get into meetings. I am not the Pope who has jurisdiction over every part of the Roman Catholic Church. So, particularly on the last point that was raised, which I heard very clearly and had read before, I commit, secondly, to work with the primate and to go on listening directly and indirectly to learn what we should do, and to the extent it is within my power to do something, I will. And let me be clear. I've learned recently from bad experience in England that there will be things even within the church that I cannot change. It's a long story and I'll cut it very short, but in one of the chapels of a college at Cambridge University, Jesus College, ironically, there is a monument to a major donor, beneficiary of the college in the 18th century. He earned his money, or sought to earn his money over his life through trading in slaves. It's a huge monument. It weighs 1.5 tons of marble. For reasons that you will understand in the depths of your being, those who came from the Caribbean and West Africa found themselves unable to worship in that chapel when, to get into it, they had to look at this monument to the one who had been a formative figure in enslaving their ancestors. The head of the college is a descendant of slaves from Barbados. And so they sought to get legal permission to move the monument, but being good historians, not to throw it in the tip, but to put it up outside the chapel, outside a place of worship, a sacred place. To take it outside and have in the cloisters signs round it and digital displays to help people think through the issues and why this was so bad. It seems, I would expect to you as to me, an obvious decision and a very gracious one by those who were offended. But a judge in a Church of England court, a High Court judge, decided that for reasons I have read but struggle with, it could not be moved. I had appealed for it to be moved. The bishop had appealed for it to be moved. It's not been moved. I say this not to distract you, but to say, even on things that are as blatantly obvious, as easy and as straightforward as saying that there should not be memorials in churches that stop worship for those who seek to find Christ. Even that does not always happen. But what I did on that occasion, which has made me a fair few, got me into a fair amount of trouble in the press, was to side with those who wanted to move the monument. So the least I promise is, even where we cannot change things, I will support and encourage the support of the First Nations, the Métis, and the Inuit in seeking justice. I will stand with you while I am in post, even if we fail. At the Lambeth Conference this summer of bishops coming from all over the world, all the ones here I trust are coming, we will meet, and one of the key subjects we're discussing, apart from others like climate change and discipleship and all the things you'd expect, is the rights of Indigenous peoples around the world. And I will encourage commitment by the whole Anglican Communion on this subject, and for it to be part of our priorities. We have something called the Anglican Indigenous Network, which has a very powerful link with the United Nations. I will see with them what better working groups can be convened to put United Nations, to raise this issue on the agenda of the United Nations. It's already there. Can we make it more important? If that is what you and others want. In order to support practical implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, to integrate that declaration into the life of the Anglican Communion. I commit to defending those rights in my conversations with world leaders, commercial organizations, as well as the UN. I commit to doing everything I can to see the stories of Indigenous communities respectfully heard and widely told, building on the prophetic work already being carried out. And as I say at the Lambeth Conference, one focus will be on Indigenous people. And the reason for that is not some kind of charitable, they're there, we're going to try and do something useful. Quite the reverse. Without Indigenous people's full participation in the life of the church is not fully the Church of Christ. Without you, we are the less. We are inadequate. The communion is impoverished, and we deny the reality of God. There is more to learn than I can say, not only from those things I would have anticipated, family and community, in a world that is so often atomized and individualistic. Your spirituality in connection with climate change. But I have heard over these 2 days that we have to learn from you about reconciliation and healing and forgiveness and growth and grace and love and patience. I hope that what I have said so inadequately, and as I've been saying it, my mind has been saying to me all the way through, this is not good enough. But I want to underpromise and overdeliver, as I said yesterday. I hope that what I have said may be the beginning of a deeper conversation in words and action. The conversation must include apology, but it must not stop there. In humility, in deep sadness, I end as I began, with one more thing to say after I finish what I want to say formally. By apologizing unreservedly and unqualifiedly, and saying again to you, even where I cannot change things, I will do everything I can to stand alongside and continue to learn from you. Thank you. The other thing I learnt, just my final, very, very final point, is how you manage to keep a sense of humour. Over the years, I suppose it's the only way that one keeps going. Bishop Isaiah,